Sometimes you can tell when you're holding more than a sports card. It literally feels like you're holding history in your hands. There is a difference between holding something that is just kind of cool and something that actually represents history. And there are certain things that you hold and you look at it and it's so much more than what meets the eye. I could not imagine being alive in 1932. 90 years ago, the world was a completely different place. The United States was in the height of the Great Depression, and it was a difficult time for everyone. There were a few bright and shining stars that kind of helped people through that difficult time. But in 1932, during the Great Depression, the jobless rate was 24%, and many kind of normal, ordinary Americans found themselves living out of their cars or in these little shanty towns. At the time, in 1932, the average lifespan of a man was 61 years old and a woman was 63 years old. The cost of a postal stamp was 3 pennies. To say that times were difficult in the early 1930s would have been a complete understatement. Times were very, very rough in the Great Depression. And so what did Americans do? They turned to the national pastime to escape. When I hold this 1932 U.S. Caramel Babe Ruth in my hand, I can't help but think what he meant to so many people in the early 1930s. Think about it. They're literally fighting to survive and they're looking for hope anywhere that they can find it. So when I look at this card that is literally nearing 100 years old, one thing that I think about is the fact that this guy symbolized great things to come in the United States in a time of great uncertainty. U.S. Caramel was a company based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and they had a bright idea that they would create sports cards and put them in with their little caramel candies. Up until 1932, it was a very common thing for them to put the very small sports cards in with tobacco. But because it was somewhat of a trial run, they didn't do a lot of these. And so this card has now become very rare. One of the stories that I love to tell about this card is that on the back, it says that if you collect the entire series of 32 pictures of famous athletes, then you can return it and mail them all back in and receive a baseball worth $1. If you put together 3 complete sets, you can return it and get a fielder's glove worth $3. Here's the crazy thing about it. There was one card that was nearly impossible to find. Now, it wasn't the Babe Ruth. The Babe is very rare, but there was one card in that set that was very difficult to find, which meant it was kind of a marketing scheme, a marketing ploy to get kids to buy more and more caramel to complete that set, to get that baseball or to get that glove, and yet they were never able to complete the set. So it was a Great Depression marketing scheme, and it may have been out of a place of desperation because times were so rough. So a year later, Gowdy released what we now know is one of the most amazing, famous sets of all time, the 1933 Gowdy set, which featured 4 different Babe Ruth cards, 2 different versions of the Lou Gehrig, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful set. In many ways, this was the forerunner to that style of card. The square image instead of kind of the T206 longer rectangular image. This is more of what we know a baseball card or a sports card to be now through time. This was a forerunner to that. In the sports card hobby, of course, there's an emphasis on values and tracking sales and things like that. It's a part of the fun. But what's so amazing is when you hold something that you know it's been difficult for this to survive the test of time, to survive. In the 1930s, this card was not worth much. This was probably worth under $1 in the early 30s. And in fact, all throughout the 30s and probably within the 40s also, maybe not until the late 40s, was this card even worth $5-10. That kind of shows you the way that cards were looked at. They were collectibles, but not in the way that we see collectibles. They were, things that kids kept in their school binder. They put them in their tire spokes. They pinned them on their wall, but they never thought of them as being investments. They never thought of them as something that would be worth money down the road. It was just a way to look at their favorite player, somebody that they looked up to. What's so crazy about the 1932 season is that Babe had almost completely finished his career by this time. He was 39 years old and still crushing home runs.
That said topic being a gent by the name of George Herman Ruth. What a man. The Babe and I got back to town an hour ago from an all-day fishing trip out on the south shore of the Long Island Sound. Between weekfish, the gang did a lot of reminiscing about the series, and everybody agreed that the high point of the whole works was Babe's homer in the 5th inning of the 3rd game out in Chicago. I've played a lot of baseball, but I have never seen so much nerve on display before. Babe had 2 strikes on him. There were 50,000 Cub fans giving him the old Bronx cheer, and the Cub players were riding him from the field. So what does he do? He stands up there and tells the world that he's going to sock that next one. And not only that, but he tells the world right where he's going to sock it, into the center field stand. A few seconds later, the ball was just where he pointed, in the center field stand. He called his shot and then made it. I ask you, what can you do with a guy like that?
So a 1932 card still is a playing years Babe Ruth card, which is amazing. And the fact that it's color, the fact that it looks like what we know a sports card to look like, really shows how groundbreaking it was, even though many of these didn't survive through the years, and the print run initially was also pretty short. I've owned quite a few different Babe Ruth cards through the years, in fact more than I can remember, and this card is by far my absolute favorite for many reasons. One, it's the first color Babe Ruth card that looks like an actual kind of common modern day sports card. Two, it's got the Yankees logo on his hat. And what I love is the hat is kind of cocked to the side, kind of like an OG. And he's got a little smirk, a little smile on his face, which wasn't common. A lot of the photos back then, Babe kind of looked like he was sad, depressed, serious, somber. But this one, he's got that little kind of smirk on his face. And with that Yankee logo, which you don't get in the 33 Gowdy cards, which I love, except for the standing bat pose, which it's just a small little logo on his hat. But it just screams classic New York Yankees, America's team, 1932. And the contrast with that deep red, the Yankees hat, which I just think kind of adds a little bit of uniqueness to this really amazing, classic, almost 100-year-old baseball card.